Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, I think over the last 3 or 4 months I've spoken to more and more diverse audiences across Auckland than I have in 30-odd years in a political career. I've spoken to meetings organised by the National Party, the ACT Party, the Labour Party, the Green Party and New Zealand First. I've spoken to business groups, I've spoken to Rotary groups, I've talked to ethnic communities, Maori and Pacifica. And I'm saying this, Mr Speaker, because what I've found in talking to those audiences is an amazing unanimity amongst 35% of New Zealand's population about what they expected from the budget and what Auckland needed. And I've got to say, and I say this with some regret, because I thought with the massive debate around housing need, around transport congestion, that this would have been a budget that delivered some relief from the problems of housing and transport gridlock. And I've got to say, sir, not only was I disappointed in the budget in failing to deliver in these areas, but so too is the broadest cross-section of Aucklanders who are looking for something better. And the argument generally goes like this. The government wants to increase the population of the country, and maybe that's okay. Immigration is good for a country. But we are now seeing migration at the highest level in decades. 70,000 more people coming into New Zealand. And how is that impacting Auckland? Auckland's growing by 800 people a week. And people say, well, let it be okay if the government was providing the infrastructure needed to cope with that growth. The transport to stop the roads being gridlocked and the housing so that New Zealanders, first home buyers, could still afford to buy a home in their own city. And I've got to say, sir, the budget offered no relief at all on either of those areas. I even read the Minister's press statements, the Minister of Building and Construction and Transport, and they usually skite sheets. This is what we're doing. And I read it line by line, and the word Auckland didn't exist there, sir. It just didn't exist. And the truth of the matter is, those are really serious problems. They're not only holding Auckland back, but they're holding New Zealand back. We now have a situation where our roads and our motorways, not only at peak hour, but even outside peak hour, are becoming gridlocked. We've got the Productivity Commission and the New Zealand Council for Infrastructure Development saying that congestion in Auckland is costing $3 billion a year. $3 billion. And Aucklanders say to me, well, aren't we just pouring that money down the drain? That's money in lost productivity and other costs, and we're getting absolutely nothing for it. You know, if we were investing $3 billion a year in a congestion-free transport network, we'd have something to show for it, and Auckland could move forward. But we're not, and there wasn't a dollar in capital investment in Auckland to relieve that congestion, sir. And then it comes to housing affordability. Now, if the Minister of Health listens, and you listen through your ears, not your mouth, Dr. Coleman, if he listens, I'll tell him what some of the problems, including in his own electorate, are. The problem is, sir, that housing prices in Auckland went up by over 15% in the last year, on top of the 15% the year before. Do you know, sir, what the average cost of a house in Auckland is now? It's $955,000. God damn it, I bought my first house in Mount Roskill for $64,000. It was 1.5 times my annual salary. Today, my kids are paying 6 or 7 times their annual household income to live out in places like Papakura and Pukekohe because they can't afford to live closer to town than that. And I've got to say, sir, that, you know, I've heard all sorts of blame being attributed to why these people can't get into homes of their own. You know, it's their own fault. If you chose your parents wrong, and your parents can't pay your deposit to get into a home, you can't buy a home in Auckland today. That's the truth of it. That's why we will have growing inequality in our city. because those who come from reasonably privileged backgrounds can be on the housing ladder, and those that don't will miss out. That's not the New Zealand, that's not the Auckland that I want, Dr. Coleman. I want a New Zealand where the Kiwi dream of owning your own home can survive, and people can have that stability and security, and they can have a chance in life. And I'm telling those members that there is nothing in this budget that helps those young people towards the dream of home ownership. And I'm saying to those members that each year in Auckland, with the population growth, we are falling 4,000 houses further behind what we need. And that means that 4,000 people lose out on getting any form of what we would call reasonable housing. It means that people are sleeping in garages and cars and are doubling up in homes. And that's not the New Zealand that I want, Dr. Coleman. That's not the Auckland I want. And nothing in this budget will alleviate that. People who are renting their homes have seen their rents go up at 7 times the overall rate of inflation. These are massive problems, and there is nothing in this budget that addresses those problems. Now, sir, I want to say that it's not good enough just to blame the council, and that seems to have been what some members of the government have been doing recently. The council does have its responsibility. It must make sure that sufficient land is available for the growth that is happening in the city. And if the council doesn't accept that the city needs to go up and out, it won't be doing its job. I don't have a problem with the national policy statement other than this. The problem that I have with that, sir, is that it deals with one aspect of the problem, but not the others. I want to know, where is the policy that will see affordable homes being built? Do you know that affordable homes are about 5% of the homes being built at the moment, sir? Used to be about 50%. We won't get affordable homes unless the government is prepared to partner with the private sector to make sure that homes are developed that are affordable. That's the time-honoured way in New Zealand of providing for people to have decent, warm and healthy homes. I'm saying this too, Mr. Speaker, that you can make the land available through your planning, but if the council doesn't have the capital to provide the infrastructure needed to build homes on it, then the homes won't be built. Now, the members, well, Dr. Coleman as a member of Cabinet will know this. The Treasury reported to Cabinet that Auckland Council can neither use the rates base nor can it borrow to provide the infrastructure. So I'm saying to the government, why not have infrastructure bonds? Why not either the government raise the money itself and on-lend it to Auckland, or allow Auckland itself to raise that money so it can provide the infrastructure? If you don't do that, how is that infrastructure going to be provided if you can't borrow to pay for it or rate to pay for it? And I don't want to push the rates through the ceiling. I want to know from the government why there is not some sort of restraint on demand when 40 to 50% of the houses are currently being bought in Auckland by investors, and one house in the paper the other day, on-sold 5 times in a year, each person clipped the ticket for $30,000, didn't add anything except to the price, and the price goes up and it becomes unaffordable. I want to know why we don't do what the Aussies do and say to foreign investors, if you want to buy property in New Zealand, build a new house, add something to New Zealand. Don't just push the house up on existing prices. Sir, there's a lot that can be done. I look forward, interestingly, to working with the government, not squabbling with it, but it needs to be a government and a council that puts Auckland first and is determined to do something to address those pressing problems. I want to say it again, and I want to say it very clearly. If Auckland can't succeed, then at 35% of the country's population and productivity, then New Zealand is not going to succeed. The government cannot close its eyes to those problems. It needs to be prepared to work with the elected members of the Auckland Council after October to do something that will really make a difference for a better future for Auckland and a better future for New Zealand.
The honourable